Welcome back. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion. Almost every day a new report is issued saying some sort of food is good or bad for us. Yesterday it was a turn of chocolate, with a study showing people who eat chocolate tend to be thinner. Previous research has shown that too much chocolate is damaging, but it's not just chocolate. Similar studies on red meat, wine, tomatoes and a whole host of foodstuffs seem to offer contradictory and confusing advice. So what should we believe? Joining me is food journalist for The Guardian, Oliver Thring, Douglas McSkimming, chief reporter for The Scottish Farmer, Dr Tim Knowles, principal lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University, and Caroline Farrell, a nutritional therapist from Essential Nutrition. I'll start with you, Oliver. What should we believe? We're constantly being given different messages about how good certain foods are. 1 minute it's good for you, 1 minute it's not. What can consumers believe?
You're quite right, Daniel. It's very difficult for people to have a clear understanding of food. And I agree, it makes life very complicated. I think the most obvious thing is to retain a bit of common sense. I mean, 1 week chocolate is bad for you, the next week it's good for you. Everyone knows that a little bit of chocolate isn't going to do any harm, and a huge amount of chocolate it probably isn't very good for you. And I think as long as people retain a little bit of scepticism about the latest cancer scare in this newspaper or that, or the latest health scare in any other field, we'll probably do a lot better.
What do you think, Caroline Farrell? You're a nutritional therapist. You work on a one-to-one basis with people.
I completely agree. And I see a lot of people who are very confused about the amount of media publicity on different foods, and they just don't know what to believe. And a lot of people will react by actually just not making any changes. And at the other end of the scale, some people will react in a very extreme way, and they'll start eliminating a lot of foods from their diet, and they'll end up deficient in so many nutrients, and that's known nowadays as orthorexia, and it's quite common. What I try to say to people is be moderate and be balanced, and also find out the facts. So go to the NHS Choices website and look up the study, look up the news report, and actually find out what the evidence is behind it. Because we're always looking for a single answer to a complex problem, and there really isn't a single answer. It's about balance and moderation.
Dr Tim Knowles, if I'll bring you in here, you're a principal lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University. You've done a lot of research into this. What can people believe?
Well, the problem with these scares is very much the frequency of these scares and these alleged problems. Within these reports, there's always nuggets of good information, but it seems to be confused by perhaps a lot of hype, perhaps a lot of misinformation on the problems. I think what we should be believing in is the source of this information. Where is it coming from? Is it official government information? Is it the Food Standards Agency or some of the more independent organisations? Or is it organisations with a bias to a certain product or a certain issue or a certain problem? So I think it's the source and the media from where all this material is coming from, which is the important issue.
And Douglas McSkimming, you're chief reporter for the Scottish Farmer. What are your thoughts?
Well, the media just love stories like this. You know, the popular press just loves scare stories like this. And I think that's what it is. Mostly they are scare stories, because if we were to read everything we believed, I don't think we'd be eating very much at all. And the fact this latest thing about red meat is complete nonsense. It's an American study, and the whole way that meat is produced in America is totally different certainly from Britain and the rest of Europe, really.
I want to touch on something that Dr. Tim Knowles just said. You said we've got to be sceptical. We've got to be careful of where these studies are coming out and the kind of what time they are. We all know yesterday a study came out that said people who eat chocolate a few times a week were on average slimmer than those who ate it occasionally. That's despite the fact that we know it's full of calories. But conveniently, we're coming up to Easter. Should we be cynical, Dr. Knowles?
I think we should be very cautious. It's interesting, some of the research we've done at Manchester Metropolitan University over the years shows that consumers, rightly or wrongly, believe some sources of information, interestingly the major supermarkets, but they distrust other sources of information, i.e. the print media. So it's where the information is coming from. The other point I would make is the type of product. We seem to perceive that there are good foods and bad foods, and we seem to, on that basis, believe believe what we hear if it's in our minds a good food, and believe what we hear if it's in our minds a bad food. It depends on the type of food as well.
Caroline Farrell, you obviously know that chocolate, with too much of it is obviously bad for you. Yeah. But should we be cynical that we are coming up to Easter and this study is conveniently saying, well, go on, guys, have as much as you want?
I think we should be a little bit cynical. I mean, we all know that too much chocolate is not good for us. It's high in fat and it's high in sugar. But again, going back to moderation, chocolate has a lot of beneficial health properties. It's a good source of magnesium. It's got antioxidants. So good quality chocolate is actually quite good as part of a balanced diet. So again, it just goes back to a little bit of what we like and won't do us any harm.
Well, when people are looking at different types of chocolate, does that kind of play into it as well?
Definitely. I mean, you want to go for a really good quality, high cocoa content chocolate, minimum 70%. And then you get all the beneficial antioxidants because they're present in the really high cocoa chocolate.
And what are your thoughts, Oliver Thring, food journalist for The Guardian?
Well, Caroline's absolutely right. It's no accident that this has come out just before Easter. I think one of the difficulties is that I suppose the source of the information is completely critical. So, for example, a few years ago, everybody started talking about superfoods all of a sudden. In fact, you can go to Google Trends and plot how this word suddenly appeared out of thin air in about 2006, I think. And that was due to a very, very sustained campaign from the manufacturers of a certain kind of juice. And it's a word that caught the public's imagination, and people now still today talk about certain fruits as being superfoods. So, yeah, I'm glad, as if Tim is right, that I'm sure he is, that people are sceptical about getting their medical advice from newspapers, because it certainly isn't the place to go for most of it.
Who do you think is the main push of these stories, especially if we look at the superfoods one, the one you've highlighted? You say is that mainly from companies who want to push a certain brand?
Well, exactly that, and it works for positive things like superfood, or eat lots of chocolate before Easter. And it works for negative things as well. If you have a vested interest in saying chocolate is bad for you or coffee is bad for you, then you can always come up with some pseudoscience to justify that opinion.
Just a reminder, you're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion. Joining me at the moment is food journalist for The Guardian, Oliver Thring, Douglas McSkimming, chief reporter for The Scottish Farmer, Dr Tim Knowles, principal lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University, and Caroline Farrell, a nutritional therapist from Essential Nutrition. If we look back over, say, the past decade, we've had food scares including salmonella in eggs, listeria in cheese, and BSE, or so-called mad cow disease. We can't neglect the fact that the media do play a role in providing information to consumers, to readers, about the dangers of food. But what role do you think they play in reporting food risks, Oliver?
Well, obviously they play a very valuable role in informing public of potential dangers in the food chain, but they do so often in a very hysterical fashion. And I'm sure Douglas will be able to tell you that the poor old farmers in this country have had an absolutely torrid time the last 20 or 30 years because of exactly these problems. I mean, the BSE risk, at the time when BSE broke, people were saying, columnists with no scientific qualifications at all were saying this is going to be a catastrophe worse than AIDS. I mean, and that really panics people. And still, I think France don't import our beef. So, no, the media have a duty to be responsible, but also they have a need to sell newspapers, and I think those two impulses are often in conflict. The major difficulty as well is that the public fails to appreciate the great scientific cliche, but a very valid and valuable cliche, that correlation doesn't equal causation. So just because, statistically speaking, the people who eat chocolate are thinner, or just because the people who take vitamin pills die quicker than those who don't take vitamin pills doesn't mean that taking vitamin pills kills you or that eating chocolate makes you thin. And a lot of people could do with having this message reinforced, I think.
Dr. Tim Knowles, you've done a lot of research into food scares specifically. If we look back at the last 5 years or so, what would you say have been the main food scares and the ones that have impacted on consumer buying and consumers quite a lot? And do you think they've been justified?
Well, the interesting thing about the point of the individual food is I've remembered food scares on, for instance, farmed salmon, which the consumer actually ignored because they felt that salmon is a good food. And actually, if you look at the market research data, volume and price never changed with those scares before and after the scare. Go backwards to issues to do with mad cow disease and the human equivalent. People did react, rightly or wrongly, because of the media discussion on how it can affect humans. But if you look at the facts, about 140 people died over the 10 or 12 year period from that particular human equivalent of mad cow disease.
So the media were right in saying, well, be careful. They were right in hyping it up then.
They were right in helping it up, but then it got to a level where you couldn't buy beef on the bone. And my elderly parents were happily enjoying their beef on the bone when the government were saying it's illegal to sell it. So I think, again, it comes back to the point that there are nuggets of information, which are good information, lost within this hype and this scare tactics, which are wrong. I note the recent articles on salt and salt in pizzas. Yes, excess salt for you is bad, but I think it's a minority of us who eat takeaway pizzas every day of the week. I was telling one of your colleagues that last time I ate takeaway pizzas was, I think, 3 years ago. So this issue about salt actually is a good point. It's actually blurred by the message which is coming out of the media, which is a bad point.
Douglas, I want to bring you in here. You're a chief reporter for the Scottish Farmer. Journalists are being given a bad name almost here, saying they're hyping up some of the food scares. Do you think that's always true?
Yes, well, some of the media certainly do that, but I think we need to do more in educating, especially the younger generation in this country. And with relation to red meat, I mean, the British Nutrition Foundation has just brought out a study showing that the role red meat plays in a healthy diet, and it clearly shows that a moderate intake of lean red meat makes a significant positive contribution to a healthy diet. And the other thing that many people don't realise is the way that our beef cattle are fed in this country. All our beef cattle are fed on grass pasture, whereas in America, the cattle are in huge, massive feedlots. Some never see the light of day, and they're also fed hormones over there that are not allowed in the UK. So I think we need to educate the public here a bit more on just how good, in relation to beef, our beef is.
Caroline, you're coming from this at a different angle. You're dealing with people on a one-to-one basis. So we might see someone that comes to you and says, well, I've heard that meat's really bad for me. I've heard chocolate's really bad for me. I've heard tomatoes can prevent cancer. How does this impact? When they're reading these news stories, how does it impact on their behaviour and kind of their worries?
Well, people are really confused and they just don't know what to believe. And as I said before, they'll react either by not doing anything or going to extreme behaviours and eliminating a lot of foods from their diet. And I've had a lot of clients who've eliminated red meat because of a family history of cancer and their concerns about the current research. And it is true that the quality of the meat in our country is very different from the meat that you have in the States. And again, it goes back to moderation. A little bit of meat is not going to do us any harm. It's about choosing really good quality meat and having a little bit in moderation, because meat is a very important source of iron and zinc and other nutrients. So we need to stop extreme behaviour and be more balanced. And we also need to, as Oliver said earlier, we need to understand how the research is conducted And that information is available to consumers on the NHS Choices website, and that's a great resource for people to actually find out, does the evidence stack up?
Is it ever possible for us to change the way that the media reports these stories so that people don't become so scared? Or is it down to consumers to say, well, this story tells me that the tomatoes are good for me, this one tells me tomatoes aren't good for me, and they should make the choice? Should the reporters nanny them?
I think it's really difficult to do that because balance isn't a very sexy story. We want interesting stories, and as consumers also, sometimes we want a simple solution. So we kind of want to know if we eat tomatoes, we won't get prostate cancer. But unfortunately, it's just not that simple. And I think it's up to us as consumers as well to go and find out the facts and ultimately take control of our own health.
Dr. Knowles, what kind of trends do you notice when different stories come out, say, within a week of each other? One saying that one foodstuff is good for you, the other one saying the same foodstuff is bad for you. How do you see consumers reacting?
I actually see consumers almost getting almost a food scare overload in the information they're getting to hear about or getting to read about. The other thing is, I think, dependent on the consumer and the individual, be they young or old, they react to these stories in a different way. Their education backgrounds. Take the example of salt as what the subject we've been talking about a little bit. The people perhaps above 45 years of age actually take the issue of salt, their diet, probably a bit more seriously than people of younger ages, in their teens or in their 20s. So I don't think it's a reaction that everyone has. I think it's certain sections of the community that actually react to these scares in different ways. Some to ignore them and some to actually worry about them.
Just a reminder, you're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion. Joining me at the moment is food journalist for The Guardian, Oliver Thring, Douglas McSkimming, chief reporter for The Scottish Farmer, Dr. Tim Knowles, principal lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University, and Caroline Farrell, a nutritional therapist from Essential Nutrition. Caroline mentioned that if newspapers don't sell sexy stories, then they're not going to sell at all, and it's in their interest to make a story popular. It's in their interest to make it exciting. Now, coming from a journalist rather than a food journalist, papers aren't going to want to run stories telling you absolutely everything and putting in too much detail because consumers won't read it. How do you think that newspapers can maybe report more responsible journalism and give consumers better information about what is healthy and what isn't healthy?
Well, as you know, there's an inquiry going on at the moment, chaired by Lord Justice Leveson, about responsibility and the ethics in the media. And there was a couple of weeks ago, they were talking about a story where the Daily Mail had run a story that said turning on the bathroom light in the evening will give you cancer. And it was vaguely connected to circadian rhythms and shift work and how people who have to get up in the middle of the night to work and then who go to sleep when it's light are more prone to cancer. But the basic scientific evidence for that had been massively spun out of all proportion, and to tell you that you're going to get cancer if you go for a pee in the middle of the night, and that's crazy. So and although newspapers do need to sex things up occasionally, I don't think their readers are served, or they do themselves any favours by running stories like that, which are so divorced from reality. It
seems like that there are other factors that need to be taken in. If we take the Daily Mail story, obviously they were reporting the findings of the story, but it's the patterns of that person. The person that turns on the light in the middle of the night is likely to be someone that doesn't sleep well, maybe is working odd shifts, so their body doesn't relax enough, doesn't get enough rest, and maybe that affects their eating patterns and what they're eating. So maybe it kind of reports a basic idea, but there's a lot more behind the kind of lifestyle that person is living. Would you agree, Caroline?
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of salt as well, it's a good example of that, because some of the earlier research on salt and stroke risk didn't adjust for what we call confounding variables, so other lifestyle factors. So people who had salt in their diet maybe had other unhealthy habits, such as drinking more alcohol, not taking exercise. So we need to be quite careful with research. So sometimes there's other things at play rather than just simply one factor. So we do. And I think, going back to your point on how can papers report things in a more objective way, one thing I think all papers should do when they're reporting a study is actually have a link to the research. And sometimes it's actually quite difficult to find out more information about the study, and it would be useful if people could actually click on a link or go to a paper and find out what the study was actually about.
The consumers that come to you and ask for advice on what to eat and maintaining healthy lifestyles, where are they looking? Where are they finding all their information from? Is it just newspapers?
It's mainly newspapers and books, unfortunately, and the information is conflicting and it's inaccurate because, as I said before, to have a sexy story, you need to put in some exaggerated facts or maybe leave out some important information. And also, as I said before, consumers sometimes do want a simple answer. So they quite like simple answers.
So we should blame the people that come to you then? It's not the media's fault. It's the consumers that are coming to you and going, well, I can't make a decision.
I think it's everything. I think it's the way the media reports stories and the way consumers are looking for a simple answer instead of maybe taking a more balanced view. So I think we're all to blame, really. I think it's quite a complex problem.
Oliver Thring, media out in the clear. It's not our fault at all. Consumers can't make their own decisions. It's their fault.
I think the consumers know perfectly well what they need to be doing and how they need to be eating. Everybody knows if you eat vegetables and fruit and you don't eat too much saturated fat, then you're doing yourself many favours. And the kind of crazy mollycoddling of people and saying, well, 1 minute tea cures cancer and the next tea gives you cancer. Everybody should just ignore all of these stories for the drivel that they are. What is it Michael Pollan says? Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's all we need to know.
Dr. Knowles, obviously you have a huge background in looking at food scares. When it comes to consumers making decisions, is it the role of the media to report it? Is it the role of the consumers, or is it the role of the scientists to help consumers make better decisions?
I think it's the role of the media and the recognised independent bodies to report the facts, the information, to help the consumers make a decision.
Are they doing a good job at the moment?
I actually think that the consumers need to take a little bit of responsibility for the food that they're eating. They need to actually, when they look at stories in the press, they need to ask themselves, where have these stories come from? Who's funded this so-called independent research? Is there a question mark on the independence of the research? There are plenty of sources of information. And in this technological world that we live in, it is not too difficult to find out independent sources of information to the questions we want answering.
Do you think the media is doing a good enough job at the moment?
I think that certain sectors of the media are doing a very good job. I think the more serious ends of the media are doing a very good job. I worry about the Food Standards Agency or the various government agencies who, if you ask people in the streets about these sorts of agencies, which give very good information, people actually don't even know about them. I recognise that the major supermarkets, the Tesco's and Sainsbury's, Waitroses and Asda's, provide some very good information. I wish they would take on board more the issues to do with salt, to do with healthy eating, and actually build them into the products that they actually sell to the consumer. That is how I feel that it's the way it's persuading the producers and the retailers, which is an excellent way in actually trying to improve our views on healthy eating and a balanced diet.
I think Tim's quite right. The supermarkets have been very proactive in clearer labelling because they know that if they don't do it, there's going to be legislation imposed that forces them to label things in a way that they really don't like. So the traffic light system, for example, has been, I think, is a very good way. And also not just listing sodium content, but actually salt content, which, as everyone knows, is considerably higher than the sodium in something. So, no, I think the supermarkets, I agree with Tim, they do a really good job.
Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of this discussion. Caroline, if we look at the decisions that consumers are making, you're probably the closest person to consumers at the moment. How do you think it will pan out now to help? How do you think that we can help consumers make better decisions about what they're eating? Is it looking at the media, or is the next step now looking at how food is labelled?
I think food labelling is really important, and I think more than anything the salt and pizza scare has told us that we need to provide better labelling to consumers, and we need to have an independent source of information whenever there is a health scare, that consumers know where to go to find unbiased information and recommendations. I think that's the key for consumers, to empower themselves by going somewhere and getting unbiased information.
Is that not already available at the FSA or NHS Choices?
Well, the NHS Choices does have that, but I don't think many people are aware of it. And I think it's a really important thing to tell people about it, because it's so easy to, if you see any story in the news, chances are if you go to the NHS website, click on news items, you'll find a report giving you exactly what the details about the scientific study and giving you a recommendation.
Dr. Knowles, just a quick answer, if you would, about food labelling. Is this the next step now in consumers making good choices about what they're eating?
It's central to this whole issue to do with healthy eating, what we eat, and traffic light system and systems similar to that. You need to actually simplify down, the information that you give consumers, so they can actually make a choice. I notice the comments people make about salt in pizzas again. They talk about grams. Most people actually can't relate so many grams to how much they should be eating or what's an average portion. I think the challenge is graphical representation, simplification of the process, so people understand how to make a choice. But the decision has to be the consumers. It's not for us to nanny people into doing what's good for them or what's bad for them. It's for them to give them the information in a clear, understanding way, so that they actually can make a choice, and hopefully they make the right choice.
Douglas McSkimming, final word to you, Chief Reporter for the Scottish Farmer. How far would you want to see this labelling implemented? Do you want to see it across every single type of food that can ever be bought in any supermarket?
Well, certainly in relation to meat, lamb and pork, certainly labelling has to come in, and even milk as well. But I think the message is simple. If people eat in moderation and have a balanced diet, which includes an Aberdeen Angus steak once a week, dare I say, I don't think anybody has much to worry about.
Well, I think that's a good place to end today's discussion. It seems the future for reporting food risks and benefits leaves the consumer to make wise choices from the information presented to them. But also it seems a responsibility for media organisations not to overhype certain risks. And as you said, Dr. Knowles, we'll also be looking out for food labelling on most products to try and help consumers make the right decisions for a healthy lifestyle. Thank you to all of my guests today: food journalist for The Guardian, Oliver Thring; Douglas Skimming, Chief Reporter for the Scottish Farmer; Dr. Tim Knowles, Principal Lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University; and Caroline Farrell, a nutritional therapist from Essential Nutrition.